Chapter 51. Zhang Wu. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 51. Zhang Wu. Yilin slightly frowned upon hearing such a conversation outside the door. There was indeed a disciple surnamed Zhang who had decent aptitude that day. He could be considered an outstanding one, at least among that day's new disciples. They talked about the next sect master, but Yilin didn't care. The position of sect master was for those who were capable. He would naturally be willing to see new disciples who came later and surpassed him. That was also an extraordinary aspect of Yilin's attitude and bearing. It wasn't unreasonable for Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao to value him. But at the same time, Yilin was also very confident in himself. It wouldn't be so easy to surpass him and become the new main disciple. However, to have such a situation of forming cliques among the outer disciples of the Baiyun sect on the first day made Yilin unhappy. Knock. 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 The room instantly became quiet after Yilin knocked 3 times on the door. Yilin pushed the door open after turning around to look at Lin Qi. The people in the room were shocked and quickly bowed upon seeing that it was the main disciple, Yilin. Greetings, senior. At the same time, these new disciples could not help but feel nervous. The senior should have heard their conversation just now. Was he going to make things difficult for them next? These people would not have a good time if the senior blamed them. However, Yilin did not mention the conversation just now. He just nodded slightly and said, "Juniors, let me introduce him to everyone." Yilin turned sideways and let Lin Qi enter everyone's line of sight after saying that. This is the last disciple who entered the sect today. His name is Lin Qi. From today onwards, Junior Lin will live with you. You must get along well with your junior as seniors. You can also give Junior Lin some pointers. One had to know that these people had only just entered the sect today. How could they have any experience in cultivation? Everyone understood after hearing that. It seemed that this Junior Lin's aptitude was especially bad. Everyone understood and nodded one after another. Among them, a rather handsome man with a good physique said, "Senior, please rest assured. We will get along well with the junior." Yilin glanced at him and nodded slightly. That man was called Zhang Wu. He was the brother Zhang they were talking about just now. "Zhang Wu, you have the most aptitude among today's new disciples. You have to help your junior and set a good example in the future." Then, Yilin gave a few more instructions to Lin Qi and left them alone. The few disciples were left looking at each other. "Senior Yu seems to be quite magnanimous. He should have heard it just now. I thought he would be angry. I suddenly feel that Senior Yu is so handsome." A few new disciples could not help but sigh upon seeing that Yilin did not blame them or mention it at all. Zhang Wu was a little displeased this time. That bunch of fence-sitters had just been flattering him, and now they were flattering Yilin again. Zhang Wu turned his head to look at Lin Qi when he thought of that and asked, "Hey, newcomer, did you and senior hear our conversation just now?" Lin Qi glanced at Zhang Wu and did not answer. He just silently found an empty bed and walked over, prepared to take a rest. Zhang Wu was already a little displeased when he heard the other disciples praising Yilin. But the junior dared to even ignore him. How could he tolerate that? Moreover, the meaning behind Yilin's words just now was that Lin Qi's aptitude was not good, so he asked everyone to take care of him. He, a person with poor aptitude, actually dared to ignore him, the new best disciple. Wasn't he courting death? Zhang Wu became angrier as he thought about it. He raised his voice and said, "Hey, I'm talking to you. Are you deaf?" The other disciples also saw that Zhang Wu seemed to be unhappy at that moment. All of them trembled upon thinking of how they had just praised Yilin in front of Zhang Wu. They didn't dare to go up and dissuade him. It seemed that the junior was going to be bullied today. Lin Qi slowly turned around and said calmly upon hearing Zhang Wu's words, "We heard it, so what?" Hiss. The other disciples gasped. Senior, you heard it. They were doomed. Zhang Wu's expression also became a little gloomy. Although he was a little carried away just now, he was still more or less afraid of the main disciple, Yu Yilin. Zhang Wu became even more depressed. At the same time, he also looked down on Lin Qi, this new junior. He was a new junior with extremely poor aptitude, but why did his every move give people an elegant feeling? Moreover, he was somewhat handsome. Although this world also respected martial arts, who would be willing to be ugly if one's appearance and image could be better? Zhang Wu looked at Lin Qi and became more and more unhappy. You, come over and massage my shoulders. Zhang Wu pointed at Lin Qi and shouted. Lin Qi frowned slightly and looked at Zhang Wu with a pitying gaze upon hearing his gaze. That gaze seemed to say, you're just a piece of trash of this level. How could Zhang Wu endure such a gaze at Zhang Wu? He immediately jumped off the bed and walked in Lin Qi's direction. It seems that I, Zhang Wu, have to teach you what it means to be respectful. Lin Qi didn't have any reaction upon hearing that. He just looked at Zhang Wu indifferently. However, Lin Qi didn't care about Zhang Wu at all. He just laid down on the bed and prepared to rest. He wouldn't worry if Zhang Wu wanted to cause trouble for him. After all, he had already earned 100,000 points in his previous world. That wasn't the first time he had reincarnated. Points could be spent at any time. He could immediately exchange for a low-level cultivation technique and then max it out with one click if he wanted. At the very least, it wouldn't be a problem for him to deal with trash like Zhang Wu. The other disciples were slightly shocked. They hurriedly stopped Zhang Wu and said, Brother Zhang, Baiyun sect forbids conflict between disciples. They might even kick you out. Yeah, it's our first day here. It's better to avoid trouble. Brother Zhang, the junior isn't sensible. Please don't blame him. Let me massage your shoulders. Zhang Wu stopped upon hearing the words of the other disciples. Indeed, he had achieved his goal and established his prestige. At the same time, he was also a little afraid of the sect rules. He didn't want to be kicked out of the sect on the first day. After all, he was the most talented among the new disciples, and his future was bright. It was better to keep a low profile for now. As for the other disciples, they were not taking care of Lin Qi. They did not want to cause trouble because they had already offended Yu Yilin. But at the same time, they also felt resentful when they saw Lin Qi's indifferent look. Why should they suffer for the sake of this new junior who had no insight? Lin Qi had offended all the seniors in the same room. Meanwhile, he was snoring amid everyone's resentment. Chapter 52. Baiyun Mantra. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 52. Baiyun Mantra Translator. Nyo I.bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.bo Studio. The next day, at the Mount Baiyun training grounds. Several hundred disciples had been accepted into the sect after a day of entrance test a day ago. That day was naturally the day for the further test of these disciples. They would likely be selected by the watching elders and accepted into the sect if they passed the test and even showed their specialty. However, they could only continue to be an outer disciple and practice the most basic cultivation technique of the Baiyun sect if they failed the test, then wait for the next year's test. In short, that day was the day to decide where the new disciples and the people who failed the test last year would go. All the disciples had different moods on that day. Some of the new disciples who had just arrived were already excited. Some of the less talented disciples were nervous. As for those disciples who failed the test last year, most of them were full of confidence. They couldn't fail again after a year. Only Lin Qi was still in a calm state. The Baiyun sect's test was mostly about cultivation techniques. Lin Qi naturally didn't have to worry that he wouldn't pass with the max cultivation with the one-click system. Soon, sect master Daoist spiritual master Yunxiao and a few elders arrived at the arena. Yu Yilin, the main disciple from a day ago, came along with them. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao and a few elders came to the spectator stand of the arena and sat down. After that, they gave Yu Yilin a look. Yu Yilin immediately nodded and said to the outer disciples who were waiting in line in the arena, "Today is the outer sect apprentice test. Those who can pass will be accepted into one of the Baiyun's 7 branches and become an inner disciple of the Baiyun sect. Those who didn't pass, don't be discouraged. There is still a chance to continue the test next year. You will always succeed as long as you practice hard." Today's topic is the Baiyun sect's entry-level mental cultivation method, Baiyun mantra. Next, let me demonstrate it for you. Yilin lightly tapped his toes after saying that and jumped onto the training platform in the middle. Yu Yilin was naturally a famous person in Baiyun sect as the main disciple. In addition, he was handsome, and his movements were astonishing. Many female outer disciples immediately began to discuss among themselves. Some of them couldn't help but scream, "Wow, look, look. Senior Yu is so handsome. I wonder when I will be as powerful as Senior Yu. Hee, it doesn't matter even if I'm not as powerful as Senior Yu. I just want to marry Senior Yu." Baiyun sect was not like the monks of Golden Mountain Temple. Every disciple in that sect could marry. Naturally, many female disciples had already started to aim at Yu Yilin. At the same time, many male disciples were either jealous or envious of Yu Yilin. Yu Yilin seemed to be used to such a scene and was not affected at all. Instead, he continued to demonstrate, "Junior, what I'm going to say next is the mental cultivation mantra of Baiyun mantra. Please remember it." Then, Yu Yilin immediately began to demonstrate under everyone's gaze. Yu Yilin chanted, and his right hand formed a sword finger. Yu Yilin did not read out the mantras quickly. He even deliberately slowed down his speech so that all the disciples could hear him. The movement in his hand was also the simplest. It was so simple that everyone could do it with one look. Immediately, many female disciples praised Senior Yu for being so considerate and so on. Most of them were focused on watching Yu Yilin's demonstration, afraid that they would miss any details. As the beginner cultivation method of the Baiyun sect, the greatest effect of the Baiyun mantra was to strengthen the body and stabilize the meridians. At the same time, it had another function, which was to serve as the foundation for other higher-level cultivation methods. In other words, one would be able to cultivate other cultivation methods better if they could master the Baiyun mantra well. Yu Yilin had already finished reciting 8 lines of the mantra. And the right hand that he had formed the sword mantra was gradually giving off a white light. That year's new disciples had never seen such a scene before and immediately became excited. As expected, one could cultivate immortality upon arriving at the Baiyun sect. And the disciples that came last year were similarly amazed too. Only those who had experienced it themselves knew that it was not easy to cultivate the Baiyun mantra to such a level. After all, they had been here for a year, and the person with the best results could only produce a weak glow on his right hand. And the glow on Yu Yilin's right hand was already somewhat dazzling. The few elders in the spectator stand sighed with emotion when they saw that scene. Senior Yun Shao, looks like this disciple, Yilin, is indeed a great talent. Yeah, and Yilin should still have a lot of energy left. Not only that, but Yilin is also decent in the way he conducts himself in the world. He's a good talent. It seems that we can rest assured if we leave the Baiyun sect to Yilin in the future. Yu Yilin was the internally determined successor to the sect leader as the main disciple. That was already publicly acknowledged by the entire Baiyun sect. Naturally, there was nothing to hide. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao looked at his proud disciple and nodded with satisfaction. "I have watched this child Yilin grow up. He is indeed a rare talent. The last time such a talent appeared was probably 100 years ago." Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao revealed a look of reminiscence as he said that. He remembered when he was just an inner disciple. The main disciple was also so stunning at that time. Senior Lin. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao murmured softly and slowly closed his eyes. This is how the Bai Yun mantra is performed. Juniors, please remember it in your hearts. Next, the disciples whose names are called, please step onto the stage one by one and try to use the Bai Yun mantra. I wish everyone a good result. There was a round of warm applause from the audience after Yu Yilin finished his words. Zhu Dali. Here. A burly man walked out from the crowd and went onto the stage. The apprenticeship test had officially begun. Zhu Dali seemed to be a little nervous under the gaze of all the disciples and elders. The test started from the outer disciples who had failed before. On the one hand, these outer disciples had all gone through the test and had some experience. On the other hand, it was to take care of the new disciples who had just entered the sect yesterday and give them some time to practice the Bai Yun mantra on their own. As expected, many of the smarter new disciples were already practicing secretly. The few elders saw this and nodded slightly. These disciples were at least intelligent, no matter what their aptitude was. They would be able to cultivate easier than others. For now, they could be considered a good batch of disciples to teach. On the stage, Zhu Dali mimicked what he had seen and started to form a sword mantra, muttering something in his mouth. It could be seen that this disciple had been practicing diligently last year, and his actions were quite accurate. After Zhu Dali finished reciting the chant, a faint glow appeared on his right hand. It was naturally incomparable to Yu Yilin, but Zhu Dali's face filled with joy at that moment. He had taken the test last year and was sure that he had most likely passed the test. As expected, the few elders nodded their heads when they saw this. Zhu Dali put away the Bai Yun mantra, bowed to the spectator stand, and quietly waited for the elders to choose. The elders would begin to choose after passing the test. Generally speaking, there would be elders willing to take him in as a disciple as long as one passed the test. The key was whether one could become the disciple of Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao in the first mountain range of Mount Baiyun. That was the crucial part of the test. Chapter 53. Zhang Wu made a name for himself. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 53. Zhang Wu made a name for himself. Translator. Nyo I.bo Studio Editor. Nyo I.bo Studio. Zhu Dali nervously looked at Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao, who was in the middle of the spectator stand. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao squinted his eyes slightly, stroked his beard, glanced at Zhu Dali, and then said, "Elders, if any of you fancy this disciple, take him in as your disciple." A regretful look appeared on Zhu Dali's face upon hearing that, but then he adjusted his expression. He naturally wanted to become Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao's disciple as a disciple of the Baiyun sect. That was almost universally acknowledged. He could only become a disciple of another elder if Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao did not take a fancy to him. Zhu Dali naturally felt regretful about the fact that Master Yunxiao did not take a fancy to him. But he did not dare to show the regretful look on his face. Otherwise, it would mean that he was not willing to become a disciple of another elder. Zhu Dali naturally would not do such a thing that offended others. Very soon, an elder suggested that he was willing to accept Zhu Dali as an inner disciple and asked if he was willing to join him. Of course, every disciple would say yes to such a question. Whoever said that he was not willing would offend others. Moreover, it was not bad even if he could only become a disciple of an elder. Most of the people would be overjoyed even with that. Zhu Dali naturally replied that he was willing. Then, the eldest disciple behind the elder took Zhu Dali to them. The others were more relaxed now that Zhu Dali had started the test. The test continued. Everyone's details were recorded. The elders would look at the details in their hands after the name of a disciple was reported. The results of the entrance test would be recorded if it was a new disciple who entered the sect this year. The results of the cultivation for the year would be recorded if it was an old disciple who had taken the examination before. In short, the elders looked at the details and had estimated the results before every disciple performed the Baiyun mantra. The examination was still going on in an orderly manner. However, the elders had already decided in their hearts before most of the disciples performed their Bai Yun mantra. As for Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao, he had already considered whether or not to accept this disciple before the disciple even performed the Bai Yun mantra. Of course, some people performed exceptionally well, which could make the elders' eyes light up. Normally, a few elders would fight over such disciples. But in the end, all of them were taken away by Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao. And some people performed abnormally. They could have passed, but they could not pass the test because of nervousness or discomfort. The elders could not be lenient for such disciples. It would be unfair. They could only let them take the test again next year. People who cultivated the Tao would live much longer than mere mortals. After all, the Bai Yun mantra itself had the effect of prolonging one's life. Therefore, a year would not have much effect on the disciples' cultivation. At the same time, it could also test the temperament of these failed disciples. They would most likely not achieve much in the inner sect if they were unwilling to endure for a year. Therefore, the test could be considered quite strict in that aspect. One disciple after another completed the test. Some were happy, while others were worried. Soon, all the old disciples had completed the test. The only ones left were the new disciples who had just entered the Bai Yun sect the day before. Zhang Wu. Your disciple is here. Zhang Wu was naturally the first to undergo the test as the disciple with the most aptitude in that batch. Yu Yilin could not help but introduce a few more sentences. Junior Zhang Wu seems to have a good aptitude. His result in the entrance test was quite outstanding. Yu Yilin did not seem to hold a grudge against the arrogant words he heard last night. Instead, he spoke a few words of praise fairly. That was also one of the methods Yu Yilin used to win people's hearts. After all, he would most likely become the sect master of the Bai Yun sect in the future. It was important for him to establish an image. As expected, the few disciples who lived in the same room as Zhang Wu immediately admired Yu Yilin. The few elders on the spectator stage who heard Yu Yilin's introduction also nodded slightly. One's aptitude was crucial in cultivations. Some people had difficulty achieving anything if their aptitude wasn't good even though they worked very hard. Some people with good aptitude could easily reach a realm that others could not reach, even if they worked hard for a lifetime. The reality was always cruel. Zhang Wu had obtained a good impression in front of the elders. However, Zhang Wu only treated these as the result of his good aptitude and not because of Yu Yilin's praise. He did not take Yu Yilin's kind words to heart at all. Of course, he didn't show any of these. He only bowed respectfully. Zhang Wu, please perform your Bai Yun mantra. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao looked at the new disciple and said with a smile. Zhang Wu immediately made a decent gesture with his sword finger and began to chant after he responded. Although it was his first time using it, he seemed familiar with it like those old disciples. Several elders nodded their heads repeatedly upon seeing that scene. This child is a seedling that can be nurtured, one of the elders said softly. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao also nodded slightly and said with a smile, indeed. I am satisfied with this disciple too. Although he can't compare to Yilin, he is still a talent. He will become a talent in the future with a little tutor. The evaluation from Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao was considered high. Although the other elders expressed their agreement, they also cursed silently in their hearts. It seemed that this talented young man would be snatched away by that old fox, Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao. Zhang Wu finished reciting the chant. Following that, the disciples at the scene were in an uproar. They saw that Zhang Wu's right hand was gradually emitting a bright white light. He was almost as good as senior Yu Yilin. Zhang Wu was still a newcomer. Although everyone could guess that Yu Yilin was still holding back. After all, it was just a demonstration. There was no need to use his full strength. However, Zhang Wu was already amazing enough that he was able to do that. The previous few old disciples only gave off a dim light. Moreover, the old disciples had to go through a year or even a few years of cultivation before they could barely pass. Even the old disciples could not achieve such a level, but Zhang Wu could. Zhang Wu was somewhat in the limelight at the moment. He was in the limelight among the new disciples. He became famous in one act, and his reputation soared. A drop of sweat oozed out from Zhang Wu's forehead. Zhang Wu hurriedly put away the Baiyun mantra and bowed slightly. Disciple Zhang Wu is not talented and is here to embarrass himself. Please give me some pointers, masters. Even Yue Lin nodded secretly upon seeing that. Anyone smart could see that Zhang Wu had reached his limit just now. He would probably lose his reputation there if he lost himself in a moment of complacency and forcefully maintain it. Zhang Wu knew how to stop at the right time. He was considered smart to be able to do so. Yu Yilin had already made up his mind to properly nurture that junior of his at that moment. It could also be considered as him trying to win over the hearts of the people. Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao looked at Zhang Wu with an appreciative gaze and asked kindly, Zhang Wu, are you willing to be my disciple? Chapter 54. The Last Disciple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 54. The Last Disciple. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. All the new and old disciples at the test could understand what that meant. It seemed that Zhang Wu had gained the approval of the sect leader, Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao. After all, so many old disciples couldn't become a disciple of Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao. Zhang Wu was even more proud now. This disciple willingly accepts. Zhang Wu bowed excitedly. The surrounding disciples looked at Zhang Wu with looks of envy and jealousy. Everyone had the same thought in their hearts. How great would that be if they could be in his place? There were already quite a few disciples discussing in whispers below the stage at that moment. I guess that Senior Zhang Wu will be in the first place in today's test. Of course. Who can be as powerful as Senior Zhang Wu? Didn't the senior say that Senior Zhang Wu was also the first place in the entrance test yesterday? He might be the legendary son of heaven. Yu Yilin came in front of Zhang Wu and greeted him, preparing to bring Zhang Wu to the back of Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao. Zhang Wu took the opportunity to whisper, Senior Yu, last night. Yu Yilin gently pressed on Zhang Wu's shoulder and replied in a low voice, it's just a small matter that is not worth mentioning. Zhang Wu finally felt at ease after hearing Yu Yilin's reply. Although he was dissatisfied with Yu Yilin in his heart, he still had to put on an act in front of him and others. As for Yu Yilin, he had the intention to recruit this talent, so he naturally wouldn't mind such matters. Both of them resolved the small grudge they had yesterday with a short conversation. The test was still ongoing. Although Zhang Wu had made a good start, after all, this was everyone's first time using the Baiyun mantra. Naturally, most of the results wouldn't be ideal. The majority of the disciples' fate had been decided after the elders saw the details about them. Those who performed exceptionally were, after all, a minority. Most of their aptitude was shown in the entrance test result from the day before. Therefore, after many people went on stage and saw the dissatisfied expressions of the elders, they lost part of their passion. It was even more impossible for them to perform well under such a mentality. They often failed to pass. Gradually, the disciples also noticed. The order of the new disciples' test seemed to be different from that of the older disciples. The older disciples were listed according to the time they entered the sect. Taking the first disciple, Zhu Dali, for example. He completed his entrance test 3 years ago. In other words, that was already his third time participating in the apprentice test. That was why he was so skilled. The new disciples were not listed according to the time. Instead, they were listed according to the results of the entrance test. To put it bluntly, they were listed according to their aptitude. The one on the top of the list had a better aptitude, and the more they would be able to gain the favor of the elders. At the same time, the further back the disciples were, the less likely they would be to pass the test. Seeing that more than 10 disciples had failed the test in a row, the remaining people couldn't help but sigh. It seems that I have no hope this year. I can only try to pass the test next year. Yeah, the person in front has much better aptitude than me. If he didn't pass the test, I think I have no chance. Why don't I give up this year? I don't want to lose my reputation on the stage. At this moment, there were only a dozen people left who hadn't completed the test. They seemed to have secretly discussed it. They would just give up and take the test next year. Lu Yu. I'll give up this year and take the test next year. A disciple below the stage raised his right hand slightly and said in a low voice. The elders frowned slightly but didn't say anything upon hearing such an answer. Although they couldn't encourage the disciples to back down when facing the problem, they even wanted to encourage them to try. However, these disciples were already at the bottom of the list. One could imagine how bad their aptitude was. The elders didn't have to force them to go on the stage to embarrass themselves. Yu Yilin turned around and glanced at Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao waved his hand lightly and said, forget it. Let him train for another year. Yu Yilin naturally had nothing to say since the sect master had agreed. He could only continue to call the name of the next disciple. However, each of the disciples gave up on the test. That was a decision that they had discussed. The disciples below the stage had already started discussing quietly. The few of them are too cowardly. They don't even dare to give it a try. You are saying that because you have passed. They felt that they would embarrass themselves if they go on stage with such aptitude. Indeed. They will be stupid if they still insist on trying since the result is obvious. Sigh, I would have also given up on this year's test if I had known earlier. One disciple after another gave up on the test. Those disciples who were not preparing to give up at first also sighed and announced that they gave up. The first few disciples who were better than them had already given up. What was the point of going up? To make them make fun of him. In fact, everyone was indeed thinking the same thing. Previously, more than 10 people had failed to pass, so it was even more impossible for those at the bottom of the list to pass. Moreover, these disciples had already given up. It would only make others think that they had overestimated themselves if they at the bottom of the list did not give up. Most of the people had thought that the test was over. It was estimated that the remaining disciples would all give up. Even the few elders thought so. Some disciples were even preparing to go back. They wanted to race against time to practice the Baiyun mantra and complete the test next year. The atmosphere in the training field became a little strange at that moment. It was as if everyone was waiting for the test to end quickly. And the disciples whose names were called also felt such an atmosphere. It was as if they would cause everyone dissatisfaction if they gave up a little slower than others. After all, no one was willing to be wasted time. Zhang Wei. I give up. Wang Fei. I give up. Yu Yilin was still calling out the names according to the rules. The rest of the disciples reacted quickly and gave a reply that they were giving up. They were all very clear that they would be glared at by the surrounding disciples even if they only replied a little slower. No one was willing to be looked down upon. They were even less willing to be the target of public criticism. However, Yu Yilin put down the hand holding the name list when he read out the next name. Lin Qi. Everyone saw this action and naturally understood the meaning behind it. That was the last new disciple. At the same time, he was also the disciple with the worst aptitude this year. Subconsciously, everyone was waiting for the answer. Give up. At the same time, they wanted to see who this disciple with the worst aptitude was. However, the expected reply didn't appear. And everyone could see the appearance of this disciple with the worst aptitude. It was because a white-clothed young man walked out from the crowd and walked onto the stage step by step. This disciple is here. Everyone was stunned at the same time. Then dissatisfied voices spread out from the crowd. Chapter 55. An Unusual Talent. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 55. An Unusual Talent. Translator. Nyo-i.bo Studio Editor. Nyo-i.bo Studio, what the hell? Why isn't this person giving up? Could it be that he wants to try to perform the Baiyun mantra? Don't joke around. So many people have failed. Was it even possible for him with a poor aptitude to success? That might not be the case. It's just our guess that the list was arranged based on aptitude. What if he has a good aptitude? Pfft. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I want to laugh. How is that possible? But not to mention another thing. This guy is handsome. What's the use of being handsome? Strength is the most important thing in this world. Sigh, what a pity. He is handsome but a fool. The elders also looked at Lin Chi and frowned slightly. That disciple was the last one to enter the sect yesterday. Even Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao had some impression of Lin Chi. It was no wonder. At first, Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao thought that Lin Chi was a talented person when he saw him. Who knew that he could barely pass the entrance exam? Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao would not want such a person to become his disciple. Similarly, the other elders had the same thoughts. Such thoughts were expressed on their faces. The elders all wanted to go back and rest after examining the disciples' test for one whole day. Even though that was the world of immortal cultivation, the elders were still human. They would have emotions as human beings. The elders were already full of disdain for Lin Chi at that moment. However, rules were rules. Since he had already entered the sect, he was qualified to take the apprentice test. It wouldn't matter if he delayed their time to go back for a little longer. Since he, Lin Chi, was willing to lose his reputation, they would just let him be. All kinds of voices appeared in the crowd, and Lin Chi noticed the elders' disdain. However, Lin Chi still had an indifferent expression on his face. To him, these guys were just passers-by. He didn't care about them at all. He joined the Baiyun sect only to learn martial arts. Joining other sects was the same for Lin Chi even if he didn't join the Baiyun sect. The reason he chose the Baiyun sect was simple. The Baiyun sect's location was closer to where he had reincarnated, that was all. Others' jaws would probably drop if they knew the reason Lin Chi joined Baiyun sect. Lin Chi, you can start now. Although Yu Yilin also felt a little surprised, he definitely couldn't lose his composure as the main disciple. So, he still followed the rules and reminded Lin Chi. Everyone didn't think highly of Lin Chi. Even Yu Yilin was no exception. He didn't think that Lin Chi could pass the test smoothly even though he had no ill intentions. However, Lin Chi still had a calm expression on his face. He only nodded slightly and started to chant the sword mantra. Everyone could remember the sword mantra and chant, so it wasn't difficult. The main purpose was to test talent and the result of using the Baiyun mantra. Lin Chi wasn't worried at all. It was because he had the system. As expected, a notification sounded in Lin Chi's mind. Ding! Detected that the host is learning the low-level mental cultivation method, Baiyun mantra. Do you want to spend 10 years of your life cultivating to the max level with one click? Ding! Detected that the host has points. Do you want to spend 1,000 points to cultivate to the max level with one click? Yes, 1,000 points. Lin Chi's face was expressionless as he thought to himself. Lin Chi felt brand new energy appear in his body in the next second. The energy was the benefit of the Baiyun mantra. Lin Chi's physique had also undergone a tremendous change when he had spent his points to cultivate the Baiyun mantra to the maximum level. In terms of the strength system in this world, if the Lin Chi was only a newbie who had half a step into the body. refining realm a second ago. Then Lin Chi was an expert who had cultivated the Qi, refining realm to the middle stage. Cultivating and increasing one's realm. And the higher one's realm, the more it would benefit in the cultivation. They were complementary to each other. Lin Chi had finished chanting the mantra at that moment. Just when everyone thought that Lin Chi would fail, an unexpected scene happened. Lin Chi's hand started to emit a faint white light. Oh my God! He succeeded. Someone in the crowd couldn't help but exclaim. That was also what everyone was thinking. Even the Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao was slightly taken aback. He lowered his head and looked at the details in his hand again. Yes, that was it. It clearly said that Lin Chi's aptitude was extremely poor and that he had barely entered the sect. How could he succeed on his first try of performing the Baiyun mantra? Could it be that he had injuries on his body yesterday, which affected his performance? Or could it be that he was a weird disciple with extraordinary talent? Although his body's aptitude was not good, his comprehension was high. All kinds of questions appeared in everyone's heart. Some of the disciples who had given up earlier had even begun to regret it. Why didn't he give it a try if even the weakest disciple had succeeded? Unfortunately, there was no such thing as regretting and traveling back in time. A strange scene appeared once again just when everyone thought that the test had ended. The light in Lin Chi's hand became brighter by a few degrees. Everyone was shocked at that time. One had to know that some of the older disciples who had cultivated for a year could barely use the Baiyun mantra. Just like Zhu Dali on his first test. It had taken 3 years for his Baiyun mantra to barely emit a little light. It was difficult for a newbie to reach such a state. And Lin Chi had exceeded the standard and emitted a slightly bright light. Not only did the disciples recall the joke they had just made, they could not help but think at that moment. Could it be that this Lin Chi wasn't the disciple with the worst aptitude? Otherwise, there was no other reason to explain it. However, a disciple below the stage who was staring intently at Lin Chi couldn't help but say, "Why do I feel that the light in his hand seems to be getting brighter and brighter?" Was it getting brighter? Everyone was slightly stunned as they focused their gaze. Sure enough, although it wasn't obvious, the light in Lin Chi's hand was indeed getting brighter. He was still improving. That wasn't the limit of his level. Not only that, Yu Yilan's face filled with surprise too. It was because Lin Chi's current expression was still as calm as ever. In other words, he could still improve further. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao's eyes also lit up at that moment as he sat in the spectator's seat. It was because many people who saw this scene were too shocked and had already overlooked one point. That was time. Right, the time that Lin Chi had performed the Baiyun mantra had already surpassed all the disciples in that day's test. No, it wasn't just that day. No one had been able to persist for such a long time, even in the past few years. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao's judgment of Lin Chi had undergone tremendous change in an instant. That disciple was a talent. He had to make him his disciple. Chapter 56. I don't want to. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 56. I don't want to. Translator. Nyo.bo Studio Editor. Nyo.bo Studio. Everyone had quieted down at that moment, quietly watching Lin Chi perform the Baiyun mantra. And the light in Lin Chi's hand was still getting brighter. What was even more terrifying was that Lin Chi did not look tired at all. He was at ease. Brightness, time, and the disciple's condition when performing the mantra. These were the 3 criteria for observing a disciple's results. Although one only needed to make the palm shine to be considered as passing the minimum standard. However, whether one's aptitude was good or not, or how much attention one would receive after entering the inner sect had to be considered in all aspects. The current Lin Chi had greatly exceeded the standard. He had become the genius disciple that all the elders had decided to fight for. Wait, the light that he emitted seems to have surpassed Senior Zhang Wu. One of the surrounding disciples exclaimed, causing Zhang Wu to tremble behind Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao. He was now a famous disciple among the new disciples. Even Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao thought highly of him. The advantages he had just obtained would instantly disappear if Lin Qi surpassed him. Zhang Wu would lose the importance Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao placed on him. That was something that Zhang Wu could not accept. However, what should happen would happen, no matter how unwilling Zhang Wu was. Sure enough, the light in Lin Qi's hand had become a little dazzling. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Zhang Wu was inferior to Lin Qi. This kid should be the first one to take the test today. An elder beside Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao said in a low voice. Zhang Wu's body trembled again this time. Then, he nervously looked at Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao, who was in front of him. However, the scene that he didn't want to see the most happened. Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao nodded when he heard the elder's words, indicating his agreement. From Zhang Wu's view, he could even faintly see the admiration on Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao's face. That was something Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao had never shown when he looked at Zhang Wu. Zhang Wu instantly felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave, and his entire body became extremely cold. Even though he didn't want to admit it, he knew it. His position in Taoist spiritual master Yunxiao's heart was already inferior to Lin Qi's. And the most outstanding new disciple that year would probably be Lin Qi. The feeling of losing something he just gained in split second made Zhang Wu feel uncomfortable. He looked at the handsome young man in white on the arena with a face full of resentment. Lin Qi. Lin Qi. Why did such a person appear in his life? Zhang Wu felt that he would become the proud son of heaven of the new generation if it weren't because of Lin Qi. He would even surpass Yu Yilin. However, Lin Qi's appearance made all these beautiful dreams shatter into pieces. The current Zhang Wu no longer had any halo on him. He was only a disciple with good aptitude. There was nothing else. Wait, am I hallucinating? Why do I feel that the light in Lin Qi's hand has already surpassed the senior? One of the disciples let out this exclamation, which immediately shocked all the disciples. Surpassed the senior. How could it be? However, the light from Lin Qi's hand was so dazzling. It seemed that he had surpassed the senior. One had to know that the senior was the main disciple. He was the heir of the next sect master. Was this kind of existence that a new disciple could surpass just like that? However, Yu Yilin also revealed a surprised expression. Although Yu Yilin wasn't sure about others, he was sure of one thing. Yes, Lin Qi had indeed surpassed the Baiyun mantra that he had just used. Although he had reserved some strength at that time, that wasn't a level that a new disciple could easily reach. It wasn't just a new disciple. It was likely that not many of them could reach this level even if they were an inner disciple. Moreover, that was under the circumstances that Lin Qi had been emitting the light for a long time. A shocking thought appeared in Yu Yilin's heart in an instant. Could it be that this junior with the name Lin Qi had mastered the Baiyun mantra? Not only Yu Yilin, even the elders could not help but have such a thought. Although the disciples were not clear about it, the elders and Yu Yilin were clear about it. Cultivating a beginner cultivation technique like the Baiyun mantra was indeed very exhausting in the beginning stage. However, it would no longer consume any physical strength after mastering the cultivation technique. It could even help to recuperate one's meridians and recover from injuries. In other words, the highest state of the Baiyun mantra meant that the more one used it, the more energetic they would be. The more one used it, the more abundant the energy would be. The elders and Yu Yilin were more convinced upon looking at Lin Qi's face that showed no signs of fatigue. That new disciple had already mastered the Baiyun mantra. That thought was equivalent to giving each of them a heavy blow on the head. Although the Baiyun mantra was a low-level beginner cultivation technique. But that was not something that a random new disciple could master on their first try. Lin Qi was an unusual talent. No, he might even be a talent even rarer than Yu Yilin. If Yu Yilin was a rare talent in 100 years, then Lin Chi was a rare talent in 1,000 years. Yu Yilin had felt that he was a favored son of heaven. He would become a mountain that this generation could not surpass. But Lin Chi, the little junior in front of him, had broken his understanding. Someone who could climb over his mountain had appeared. However, Yu Yilin was not like Zhang Wu. Zhang Wu looked at Lin Chi with hatred and disgust. And Yu Yilin's face was full of excitement. That was the feeling of mutual appreciation between geniuses. Only when one reached Yu Yilin's level would one feel such loneliness. It was a kind of loneliness that could not be overcome. And now, Yu Yilin realized that he was not the only genius in this era. Lin Chi was like him. After all, Yu Yilin was already the main disciple of the Baiyun sect. His long-term self-confidence would not let him feel that Lin Chi had already surpassed him. Yu Yilin still had this bit of confidence. Yu Yilin had already placed Lin Chi on an equal footing and treated him as his opponent at that moment. That was Yu Yilin's highest recognition of Lin Chi. Ahem. The sound of someone clearing their throat pulled everyone's thoughts back to reality. And Lin Chi also understood the meaning of that. It was enough. Lin Chi only felt his entire body feels comfortable and refreshed after he performed the Baiyun mantra. Although the Baiyun mantra was an introductory cultivation technique, the profoundness within it was indeed extraordinary. Was that the world of immortal cultivation? An excited expression flashed across Lin Chi's eyes. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shaoan noticed the split-second expression on his face. However, Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao seemed to have misunderstood something. He looked at Lin Chi with a kind face and asked, "Lin Chi, are you willing to be my disciple?" No one was surprised when Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao said that. After all, even Zhang Wu was favored by Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao. Lin Chi was better than Zhang Wu. How could he be a disciple of other elders? However, the people who were not surprised just now were shocked in the next second. "I don't want to be your disciple," Lin Chi said faintly. Chapter 57. The Favored Son of Heaven. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 57. The Favored Son of Heaven. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio. If the training field had been quiet just now. The training field now was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Even a pin drop sound on the ground could reach everyone's ears. There were even quite several people who felt that they were hallucinating. What did he just say? I'm not sure. I might have heard wrongly. I think I heard wrongly too. He seemed to say that he does not want to be the disciple. One of them said timidly. Everyone looked at Lin Chi's indifferent expression and was certain. They did not hallucinate. Lin Chi did say that he didn't want to. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao was a little awkward this time. That was the first time such a situation had happened ever since he was a sect leader. It was him who rejected others in the past. Why did a disciple reject him this time? Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao subconsciously thought of a possibility. Could it be that this Lin Chi was related to one of the elders? So Lin Chi chose to be the disciple of that elder. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao said generously when he thought of that, "Which elder do you want to choose if that's the case?" Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao asked which elder Lin Chi was willing to choose instead of asking which elder was willing to take Lin Chi as a disciple. After all, these two questions were different. All the disciples looked at Lin Chi differently at once. Everyone could see that the sect master valued Lin Chi very much. At this moment, all the elders looked at Lin Chi with burning eyes. Lin Chi naturally had to become a disciple of an elder since he did not want to become the disciple of the elders. The sect master would always choose them first whenever they met someone with good aptitude and result. It would be their turn to as elders after the sect leader chose. How could such a situation happen that day? Someone rejected the sect master and wanted to become a disciple of an elder. Although Lin Chi did not explicitly say that he wanted to become an elder's disciple, that was already the result of everyone's tacit agreement. Someone couldn't say, "I don't even want to become an elder's disciple, I just want to be an outer disciple." However, Lin Chi looked at the Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao and calmly said, "I don't even want to become an elder's disciple, I just want to be an outer disciple." Lin Chi turned around and walked down the martial arts stage after saying that. Everyone was left in a daze. What was going on? Lin Chi refused and became an outer disciple. How was that possible? A stunning and talented genius rejected the invitation of all the elders of Baiyun's sect and chose to become a puny outer disciple. Why would anyone want to become an outer disciple after joining Baiyun's sect? Didn't he know that one could receive the guidance of the elders only by entering the inner sect? One had to know that there was a huge difference between being taught by someone and not being taught by anyone, no matter how talented they are. Although there is a saying that a master led the way into the sect, one's cultivation depends on the individual. But there had to be a master leading the way. No one understood Lin Chi's choice, but he was calm as ever. He had already figured out the situation of the Baiyun sect. The cultivation techniques learned by inner and outer disciples were almost the same. The only difference was the status and the guidance of the elders. However, Lin Chi was only a passer-by in this world. Lin Chi would leave after reaching a certain level of achievement. Therefore, the status and position were nothing to him. And guidance was even less necessary for Lin Chi. Lin Chi was someone with a system. Did he need guidance? However, Lin Chi wouldn't be at a disadvantage if he joined the sect, even he had the system. Lin Chi came to the test with such attitude. However, Lin Chi saw the disdain on the elders' faces. Lin Chi's attitude toward such elders was, "It's fine if you don't worship me. Did you despise me before? I'm sorry, I despise you now. Do you want to use the achievements of cultivating talented disciples to raise your status to the next level? I'm sorry, I, Lin Chi, am not a fool. Pave the road for others." Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao frowned slightly upon seeing that Lin Chi was not joking. The Baiyun sect had been established for thousands of years, but there had never been such a disciple. Was that how unusually talented people act? But, everyone saw it after all. Although it was embarrassing to be rejected by Lin Chi, it would be even more embarrassing if they were angry because of that. After all, the Baiyun sect was one of the three major sections. It even had the vague intention of being the leader of the three major sections. How could he become angry from embarrassment just because he was rejected? Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao smiled and said in a clear voice, upon thinking about that, since Lin Chi hasn't made up his mind on which branch to choose, let him think about it first. He can seek for any of the branches to be their disciple at any time after he has decided. I'll welcome you at any time. As for now, although Lin Chi is still an outer disciple. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao paused slightly and looked at Yu Yilin at that point. Yu Yilin received his master's gaze and immediately understood. He nodded and said, "This disciple understands." Then, Yu Yilin took Lin Chi away in front of everyone. Everyone understood upon looking at the direction they were heading. It seemed that Yu Yilin was going to arrange a new residence for Lin Chi. It made sense. How could a genius like Lin Chi squeeze into the same room like everyone else? Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao nodded slightly as he looked at Yu Yilin leaving the place. Sure enough, a disciple should be like Yu Yilin. He could understand what he meant, and every time he did it perfectly. The depressed mood of being rejected by Lin Chi was gone in an instant. At least he still had Yilin, the proud disciple. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao then said in a clear voice, "Today's test ends here. The disciples who pass will follow their masters from today on, while the other disciples have to practice hard and strive to pass the test next year. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao turned to look at Zhang Wu and said, "Zhang Wu, go back with me. I will personally guide your cultivation in the future." Zhang Wu should have been overjoyed when he heard that previously. However, Zhang Wu was not happy at all now. It was because he could feel that the attitude of Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao towards him was no longer as warm as before. The reason for all of that was naturally because of that damn Lin Qi. Moreover, the other disciples there did not look envious at all even when Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao had personally promised to guide him in his cultivation. Everyone was talking about Lin Qi. Senior Lin Qi is so powerful. I wonder how the difference between his ability and the seniors. If only I could be as powerful as Senior Lin Qi. It's decided. My aim in the future will be to be like Lin Qi and strive to catch up to him. Everyone's address of Lin Qi had changed in an instant. From junior to Senior Lin Qi. That was also everyone's recognition of Lin Qi. The most eye-catching disciple this year was destined to be Lin Qi. Yu Yilin gave a few words of advice and left after sending Lin Qi to his new residence. Although Yu Yilin still wanted to chat with Lin Qi a little more, he was, after all, the main disciple and was usually busy. Lin Qi sat on the bed and began to think about the competition that Yu Yilin had just mentioned after sending him off. A competition between the famous sects. Chapter 58. Hef** King claimed that he was low-profiled. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 58. Hef** King claimed that he was low-profiled. The famous sects of the Central Plains would gather. And they gathered not to drink tea and chat but to spar. Speaking of which, everyone sparred in martial arts, exchanging what they had and did not have. But secretly, there was an unwritten rule. The sect with disciples who did well in the competition would have a high status in the next 3 years. The next competition would be held 3 years later in whichever sect's territory, which won first place in the competition. Yu Yilin had obtained the title of the number 1 disciple of the Central Plains by an overwhelming advantage 3 years ago. It was because of this achievement that Yu Yilin successfully became the main disciple of the Baiyun sect. Now that the day of the next competition was right around the corner after 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. According to Yu Yilin, he could not participate in the competition this time. It was because only new disciples could attend the competition. Those who entered the sect 3 years ago could not participate in the competition again. Yu Yilin conveyed a message to Lin Qi in his words. He hoped that Lin Qi could obtain a good result in this competition and bring honor to Baiyun sect. It had to be said that Yu Yilin had also displayed his magnanimity on this point. He did not seem to be worried that Lin Qi would surpass him at all. He even had the vague intention of hoping that Lin Qi would improve quickly. His magnanimity and vision were all things that ordinary people could not compare. As a result, Lin Qi could not help but think highly of Yu Yilin. Of course, Lin Qi had to consider whether he would participate in the competition or not. Therefore, he didn't agree immediately. After all, that competition didn't seem to be of any benefit to Lin Qi at the moment. He was just a passer-by in this world. Frankly speaking, the Baiyun sect had nothing to do with Lin Qi. What Lin Qi needed to do now was to increase his strength and strive for a higher system evaluation. Lin Qi washed up and fell asleep after considering that matter. The disciples of Baiyun sect got up one after another and went to Cultivate early the next morning. However, most of the disciples went to their respective masters to receive their masters' teachings. Only outer disciples would go to the public cultivation area and cultivate alone. That was the rule of the Baiyun sect, and it had been the same for thousands of years. But everyone in the public training area had a strange expression on their faces that day. It was because Lin Qi was also there. It was uncomfortable for such a favored son of heaven to be with the outer disciples like them. The feeling was like a lion among a group of rabbits. Although that lion would not harm the rabbits were still somewhat afraid. Sure enough, an area was naturally vacated around where Lin Chi was. No one dared to cultivate beside Lin Chi. Lin Chi was happy about that. That would instead provide him a peaceful and quiet environment. Junior Lin, you came to cultivate so early. A familiar voice sounded from behind him. Lin Chi could not help but turn around to look. It was Yu Yilin. Senior, you're early too. The two of them greeted each other in that way. Yu Yilin glanced at Lin Chi and seemed to have thought of something. He smiled and said, "Oh right, Junior Lin hasn't received a new cultivation method, right? Although you've just entered the sect, I saw that you seem to be able to perform the Bai Yun mantra skillfully yesterday. Why don't I teach you a new cultivation technique today? This way, you can also try to cultivate a new cultivation technique after you finish cultivating the Bai Yun mantra every day." Yu Yilin took the initiative to teach Lin Chi a new cultivation technique. That would also be convenient for Lin Chi. After all, Lin Chi wouldn't need to cultivate the Bai Yun mantra all day long with his aptitude. From what Yu Yilin knew, although Lin Chi had a higher talent for the Bai Yun mantra, he would continue to cultivate it. After all, the Bai Yun mantra was the Bai Yun sect's basic cultivation technique. Cultivating any cultivation technique could not be done without the Bai Yun mantra. However, how would he know that Lin Chi had already cultivated the Bai Yun mantra to its peak at that moment? In other words, he no longer needed to cultivate the Bai Yun mantra. However, Lin Chi did not intend to explain that. It saved him the trouble of asking for it since Yu Yilin wanted to teach him a new cultivation technique. Yu Yilin took out a bamboo slip from his pocket upon seeing Lin Chi nod his head in agreement. On the outside of this bamboo slip were 4 big words. Flowing cloud movement technique. That was one of the cultivation techniques of the Bai Yun sect. Although it was also a relatively low-level cultivation technique, it was something that ordinary outer disciples were not qualified to learn. Yu Yilin did that because he cared about Lin Chi. Thank you, Senior Yu. Lin Chi took the bamboo slip and thanked him politely. Yu Yilin nodded slightly and said with a smile, Junior Lin, about the competition I mentioned last night, Yu Yilin was a person with a lot of experience in dealing with the world. Generally speaking, a person who had just received benefits from others would not be able to refuse at that time. But was Lin Chi an ordinary person? Not at all. I'm sorry, Senior Yu. I've already thought about this matter. I don't want to participate in the competition. Lin Chi refused without any hesitation. It made Yu Yilin feel a little awkward. BDNVL.M he couldn't help but ask, Junior Lin, why are you unwilling to participate? Yu Yilin couldn't figure it out. None of the young disciples did want to show off when they joined the Bai Yun sect. That was a chance to shine. Some people might be worried that they would lose too badly and lose their reputation. But Lin Chi did not have to worry because he was a genius. Yu Yilin was very excited when he participated in the competition back then. It was because that was a chance to make a name for himself. Yu Yilin's talent and hard work did not let down the opportunity he had at the same time. He won. And he soared to the sky. Therefore, Yu Yilin could not understand Lin Chi's reason for rejecting him. However, just as Yu Yilin was guessing the various reasons that Lin Chi might give, Lin Chi opened his mouth, I'm sorry, Senior Yu. I'm a low-profile person. Even Yu Yilin, the main disciple, felt his eyes twitch when he heard this. He, Lin Chi, was a low-profile person. Then no one in the world would be high-profiled if he was low-profiled. Who was the one who made such a big commotion when he performed the Bai Yun mantra for the first time that made everyone shocked yesterday? Even the sect master of the Bai Yun sect, Taoist spiritual master Yunshao couldn't help but invite Lin Chi to be his inner disciple. It wasn't over yet. Lin Chi even rejected the offer on the spot. And he King claimed that he was low-profiled. Chapter 59 Flowing Cloud Movement Technique. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 59. Flowing Cloud Movement Technique. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio. Lin Chi did want to keep a low profile. However, it was his first time using the Baiyun mantra a day ago. Although he had trained to the maximum level with one click, that was not something that he could master on his first use. Therefore, Lin Chi only emitted a faint light at the beginning. It was a tentative act. Then, the more Lin Chi used the Baiyun mantra, the more comfortable he felt inside his body. That was a feeling that Lin Chi had never felt before when he reincarnated the last time. That feeling made Lin Chi involuntarily increase the strength of the Baiyun mantra. Therefore, it made Lin Chi accidentally pull out the Baiyun mantra in a high-profile manner. In other words, he was immersed in it at that moment. He did not have the intention to amaze the world. However, he could not help but exert 50% of the power of the Baiyun mantra by accident. Yes. It was only 50% of the power. If not for the fact that Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao cleared his throat and pulled Lin Chi out of his immersion state, the whole world would probably know Lin Chi's name. As for the competition, Lin Chi did not want to participate at all. Yu Yilin could only sigh and say upon seeing that Lin Chi did not seem to be joking, "I won't force Junior Lin since you have not considered it yet. But if you change your mind and willing to participate, just let me know." Yu Yilin had learned that from Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao. Yu Yilin was such a person, whether it was his conduct in the world, his words and actions, or his cultivation method. He would learn and apply whatever he saw if he felt they were useful. Lin Chi naturally saw that. He secretly sighed in his heart. Yu Yilin would be worthy of being the favored son of heaven if he hadn't been reincarnated into this world. Unfortunately, Yu Yilin could only be second since he was there. Lin Chi had to fight for first place for the sake of the system's evaluation. Yu Yilin went back alone after chatting with Lin Chi for some time. He had a lot of things to do as the main disciple. The time that he usually had to cultivate was becoming less and less. After all, he was already equivalent to the main disciple. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao also gradually transferred many matters and authority to Yu Yilin. Yu Yilin naturally knew what that meant and did not dare to neglect it. Yu Yilin glanced at the outer disciples who focused on cultivating in the public area before leaving. There was a tint of envy in his eyes. Lin Chi opened the bamboo slip and prepared to learn this new cultivation technique called Flowing Cloud Movement Technique after Yu Yilin left. Its name showed that this was a cultivation technique that could increase a cultivator's agility. Lin Chi felt he needed to learn that. Ding! Detected that the host is learning the Flowing Cloud Movement Technique. Do you want to spend 3,000 points to cultivate it with one click to the maximum level? Yes. Lin Chi muttered in his heart. Then, Lin Chi learned the Flowing Cloud Movement Technique with the help of the system. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao would be shocked if he was there. That was because anyone with a discerning eye could see that Lin Chi was different from before. Of course, those who were cultivating here were all outer disciples. No one could see the changes in Lin Chi. Moreover, no one paid too much attention to Lin Chi, even if they could see it. They would only keep a little distance from him. After all, to most people, no matter how powerful he was, that was his business. It had nothing to do with them, even if he was powerful. They might as well spend more time improving their strength if they had the time to pay attention to others. Otherwise, they could only be an outer disciple for the rest of their life. Thus, Lin Chi had already mastered the flowing cloud movement technique at that moment when no one was paying attention. Of course, Lin Chi did not use it there. He had already said before that he was a low-profile person. He might attract the attention of others again if he performed the max level of the flowing cloud movement technique there. He would not be able to cultivate in peace then. Doviko thus, Lin Chi thought that he was keeping a low profile and kept the bamboo slip. He put it in his pocket and immediately got up to return to his residence. However, that scene had a different meaning in the eyes of a few outer disciples. Isn't that person Lin Chi? Senior seemed to have given him a bamboo slip just now. It seems to be some cultivation technique. So what? Isn't it normal for a senior to care for a genius like Lin Chi? That's not the point. The point is that Lin Chi took a glance at it and put it away. He seems to be going back now. What do you mean? He can't be so arrogant even if he's a genius. It's only been half an hour since he came here, and he's gone back so soon. Who knows? Maybe he is a genius. He can even learn a new technique in an instant. TZH, I think he's lazy because he's talented. That's good too. We'll keep working hard and catch up sooner or later. After all, leaving early in the morning was more eye-catching. Therefore, many people noticed Lin Chi leaving. Everyone could not help but discuss the famous disciple among the new disciples. There were different opinions. Some people thought that Lin Chi had become lazy because of his talent and intelligence and wanted to muddle along. Some people thought that Lin Chi was too talented and had learned the new technique at once. However, only a few of them had such thoughts. Even a genius would not be able to learn the new technique all of a sudden. In short, Lin Chi had indeed become high-profile once again, even though that wasn't his original intention. Soon, Lin Chi's matter reached Yu Yilin's ears once again. He only read for a short while and then went back. Yu Yilin listened to the report from his confidant with a surprised expression. Yes, I heard that he didn't read for a short while but only took a few glances. Yu Yilin couldn't help but frown. The new junior indeed had a good aptitude. But how could he be so greedy for comfort? He had kindly given Lin Chi a cultivation technique, but he didn't expect him to go back to rest without practicing it. Yu Yilin didn't blame Lin Chi for wasting his good intentions. But Lin Chi was indeed a rare talent to Yu Yilin. It would be a loss for Baiyun's sect if such talent were wasted due to laziness. No, I have to talk to Lin Chi and encourage him. Yu Yilin pushed aside the matter he was dealing with when he thought of that and went to Lin Chi's residence without stopping. Yu Yilin, who was flying on his sword, was naturally fast. Yu Yilin arrived at Lin Chi's residence not long after that. However, Yu Yilin was shocked when he arrived there. He saw Lin Chi performing the flowing cloud movement technique in the open space in front of his residence. This kid had learned that so soon. Chapter 60. Learn the flowing cloud movement technique in one day. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 60. Learn the flowing cloud movement technique in one day. Translator. Nyo iwo Studio Editor. Nyo iwo Studio. Yu Yilin immediately stopped his sword in the air when he saw that scene. Lin Chi did not notice that Yu Yilin had arrived and was still adapting to the flowing cloud movement technique at that moment. He would not be able to use that practically in the battle if he could fully understand the meaning in it, even if he had learned it. Sometimes, it would even drag him down. Lin Chi was clear about that. Therefore, Lin Chi, who had learned the flowing cloud movement technique, did not dare to delay. He would practice it in his residence since using the flowing cloud movement technique in the public training area was too high-profile. He could perform it as he wanted since there was no one else there. Unfortunately, someone still saw that. Yu Yilin was sure that Lin Chi had learned the flowing cloud movement technique after observing for a while from afar. That shocked him greatly. One had to know that the Baiyun mantra was just the basic beginner technique. It was not difficult to perform it. It could be performed immediately after getting to know the tactic of it. That was why the Baiyun mantra was used in the apprentice test, allowing new disciples to try it out. But the flowing cloud movement technique was different. It was impossible to achieve Lin Chi's level without more than a year of hard training. Perhaps some people would be puzzled when they heard Yu Yilin's thoughts. Why did it take some people 3 years to cultivate the Baiyun mantra but took only 1 year to cultivate the flowing cloud movement technique? It was because the Baiyun mantra was based on the cultivator's use of the essential qi in his body. Learning the flowing cloud movement technique would not be difficult as long as he found this trick and had the Baiyun mantra as the foundation. Learning the flowing cloud movement technique in a short period would not be that shocking if it was an ordinary being. But Lin Chi was out of that category. He was able to perform the Baiyun mantra exceptionally for the first time. That could prove that Lin Chi was a genius. But the flowing cloud movement technique was different. It was impossible to perform the flowing cloud movement technique with such ease without a long experience in using cultivation techniques. That was why Yu Yilin was so shocked. He was shocked, but he could not casually ignore such matters. Yu Yilin immediately turned around, flew on his sword, and headed for the main branch of the Baiyun sect. There was a dedicated training room under the Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao on the main peak of the Baiyun sect. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao was carefully guiding Zhang Wu to learn the flowing cloud movement technique. Yes, that's it. Use your heart to feel the aura in your body and condense this aura under your feet. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao could tell at a glance where Zhang Wu should adjust at that moment and gave him a suggestion by looking at Zhang Wu's action of closing his eyes and controlling the aura. Sure enough, Zhang Wu immediately found the trick after Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao guided him. There was a faint surge of air under his feet. Although it was weak, it was proof that he had successfully performed the flowing cloud movement technique. Zhang Wu happily put away the use of the flowing cloud movement technique, bowed to Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao, and said, "Thank you for your guidance, master. This disciple has understood." Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao was more and more satisfied when he looked at this new disciple in front of him. Although Lin Chi's talent was even rarer than Zhang Wu's, that was only the Baiyun mantra. Some people were born with talent in using the aura in their bodies. However, Zhang Wu was a seedling with good aptitude. That was beyond doubt. So what if Lin Chi learned the Baiyun mantra quickly? The key was to see if he learned the other techniques quickly. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao comforted himself in his heart. Zhang Wu, on the other hand, coincidentally had the same thought. Wait and see, Lin Chi. Although my Baiyun mantra is not as good as you, I have already mastered the tricks of the flowing cloud movement technique. I will surpass you in time so that you will never be able to catch up with me. Zhang Wu thought to himself. He finally had the feeling of regaining his identity as the #1 new disciple. He could quickly learn a new cultivation technique and surpassed other disciples after receiving the attention of the Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao. That was the treatment he deserved. That was how his life should be. What was Lin Chi to him? Could it be that he could learn the flowing cloud movement technique without the guidance of the Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao, with just himself trying to understand the cultivation technique by himself in the public training hall? Wouldn't it be too absurd if Lin Chi could learn the flowing cloud movement technique that quick? Knock. 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 Someone suddenly knocked on the door. Then, Yu Yilin's voice sounded from outside the training room, "Master, it's me, Yilin." The joy on Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao grew when he heard that it was Yu Yilin. Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao was a little depressed after Lin Chi rejected his offer. The two proud disciples, Zhang Wu and Yilin, made Taoist spiritual master Yun Shao's depressed mood dispersed a little. "Yilin, come in quickly." "Yes." Yu Yilin gently pushed open the door with Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao's permission. Yu Yilin immediately understood upon seeing Zhang Wu next to Taoist spiritual master Yun Xiao. It seemed that his master was guiding Zhang Wu in his cultivation. "Junior Zhang, what are you cultivating?" Yu Yilin asked with a smile. Although Zhang Wu was not as good as Lin Chi in Yu Yilin's heart, Zhang Wu was still a seedling after all, and he was also a junior from the same branch. So Yu Yilin naturally took care of Zhang Wu. Reporting to senior, I'm practicing the flowing cloud movement technique. Zhang Wu's face filled with pride after saying that. However, Yu Yilin slightly frowned when he heard that. Zhang Wu was practicing the flowing cloud movement technique too. Daoist spiritual master Yun Shao seemed to have misunderstood and explained when he saw Yu Yilin frowning. I saw that Zhang Wu's aptitude was not bad, and he seemed to have some experience in using the Bai Yun mantra. So I let him try it out. Daoist spiritual master Yun Shao wanted to tell Yu Yilin that letting Zhang Wu practice the flowing cloud movement technique was his idea. Yu Yilin would criticize him with his personality if a new disciple started practicing the flowing cloud movement technique on the second day of cultivation. He would say that the disciple was learning how to run before he had learned how to walk. It was an act of aiming for too high to Yu Yilin. However, Daoist spiritual master Yun Shao misunderstood Yu Yilin's frowning expression. How would Yu Yilin not know that Zhang Wu was talented? It was the right choice to let Zhang Wu try to practice the flowing cloud movement technique first. However, if Zhang Wu knew that he had lost to Lin Qi in the flowing cloud movement technique once again, it would probably be a heavy blow to Zhang Wu. The mentality of a cultivator was important. It could well lead to a disaster if one's mentality were wrong. Daoist spiritual master Yun Shao asked in puzzlement upon seeing that Yu Yilin was still frowning, "What's wrong, Yilin? Do you have a different opinion?" Yu Yilin shook his head and said upon hearing that, "Master, Yilin also thinks that it's beneficial for Junior Zhang to practice the flowing cloud movement technique at this time, but..." Yu Yilin hesitated for a moment, but he still said it out in the end. But Lin Qi is also practicing the flowing cloud movement technique, and he had already mastered it today. Daoist spiritual master Yun Shao and Zhang Wu's face turned pale due to the shock when they heard that.